where now Marcel has been magically replaced by Finn Raven, the Director General of ESOMAR, a familiar face. If you were just watching Channel 1, you've seen him in the opening. Finn, glad to have you back on Channel 3.
Oh, thanks, Gerd. Wonderful to be here. Doing a great job as always, so it's a pleasure. Thank you.
Laurent Flores kind of mentioned it in his presidential address and also in his talk over here. There's some change coming at the ESOMAR Society and specifically at the code. Now, for those of you who are new to ESOMAR, maybe not members or new to this industry, can you just in a few sentences try to explain what is this? What is the ESOMAR Code?
Sure. So the code was actually something that was set up back in 1948, actually, when ESOMAR was founded, to lay down a set of principles that companies would work to as they were doing business across borders. In that time, obviously, Europe was coming out of the Second World War, and standards and the maintenance of standards and ethics across the markets was quite difficult. So this became a voluntary code that people could sign up to, and to which they committed a certain level of behavior, a level of professional standard, to ensure that work was done to a quality level that everyone was happy with.
Yep.
So that's where it came from. Back in the 1970s, we partnered with the International Chamber of Commerce.
Yeah. So this is now a truly global.
It is a global code, global set of principles. Which, if you're a member of the ICC and you are you subscribe to the Marketing and Advertising Code, you equally subscribe to this one. It's like a daughter code of that one.
And it needs to change, apparently.
Yes.
Why?
Well, mainly because of the digital revolution. I think in the last 10 years, you may say 20 years, there's been a phenomenal amount of development in the way people can communicate and contribute data into public fora, into open spaces. So no longer do researchers have to go out and physically contact people or ask them questions. Many of these data types are already out there through the different digital means. And that hadn't been reflected in the code. And it's a hugely important source of information for us. So the code had to be adapted to take into account that primary change.
Because just one step back before we might highlight some of the changes, what happens if I don't abide by the code? What's the consequence? Because this is a self-governing thing, right?
Yes.
What is the consequence if I...
Well, if you don't abide by the code and somebody lodges a complaint, then we have a fairly rigorous disciplinary process that kicks into action. And in the worst cases, you could be thrown out of ESOMAR as a member, because you can only become a member if you sign up to say, I promise I will abide by the code. And obviously some mistakes can be made simply without knowing or without being aware of some of the finer points. But if there's a blatant breach, then you're out.
And I guess if you're out of ESOMAR, that's the end of business in market research? Or?
No, I mean, clearly you can still continue to do business. But the fact that this is an international code endorsed by the ICC and which is accepted and endorsed by, I think it's over 60 different associations in over 70 associations in 60 countries. I mean, it is the kind of the currency that our industry uses.
So any key changes you want to highlight specifically?
Well, I think the most important one is that we're now bringing in secondary data, so data that has actually been produced somewhere else, but which we then use for research. That does mean a slight change in how we deal with consent, and consent was always, can I ask you a few questions, yes or no? If you said no, we had to move away.
Yeah.
And we've started to bring in a whole section that deals with data analytics, and that is really based again on that secondary data now being covered by the code. They're the kind of the major changes. And as Ewan mentioned earlier, we're putting it to the AGM this evening, so for their vote, and then it'll hopefully go to the wider membership for their approval.
Now, does it mean if we're pulling in the techniques of these new companies, the new entrants, the data analytics, the scraping companies, does that mean that we also want a new body of companies to actually comply to this code and sign up to this code? Is that the next step?
Yes, ideally yes. And why? Because our code is recognized by the European Union as a document that supports and actually reinforces and underlines self-regulation. ESOMAR is part of a self-regulatory group out of Europe where we talk with Brussels legislators quite regularly, talking about how industry should regulate, and we're one of those models of best practice. So hopefully that's an attraction to some of those companies to say, we'd like to come inside that tent rather than stay outside the tent.
Exactly, great. Well, now, if anybody still has any questions about this, where would they go online, or where would you direct them to dive deeper into this?
Well, obviously come to any one of us, right? If you're here or if you're planning on being here over the next few days, find any one of us. I'm not wearing the ESOMAR blue, but all of the team are. write to professional standards.
We're talking to online viewers, Finn.
I know, but they might, you never know, they might be here. Write to us at membership@esomar.org, write to us at professionalstandards@esomar.org, and we would be more than happy just to provide any information you'd like, or indeed to answer any questions that they have.
Both on the change and the code.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you very much.
No, thank you.
Thanks for explaining this, because this current change of the industry is actually my segue into one of the highlights of today. Let me move back.
Fantastic.